We've made a lot of changes under the hood in this RSpec release. It's now much faster when processing both videos and large images. I want to show you one way that we accomplish this. Let's start by loading a sample image of Vega. And for the sake of illustration, I'll use the histogram to stretch the image so that we can see the sky background. But looking at this image, what jumps out at you? Notice these wide black margins? Actually, the original image from the camera is just this smaller region. RSpec added the margins to make the image larger. In fact, if we move the orange sample lines to sample just any old region, we can see over on the right those black margins. They're here and they're here. The software has always added these margins for a very good reason. They allow you to rotate the image without losing any data. Let's see how that works. On the rotate window, watch the star and you can see that it never falls off the edge of the image. That's because the black borders RSpec added are there to catch it. 5 or 10 years ago, when camera sensors were small, this was a really important feature. It meant you could squeeze a spectrum onto the longer diagonal of your camera sensor and then after the fact, rotate it to the horizontal. But you know, these days, camera sensors are much larger than they were back then. So there's usually no need to squeeze the spectrum onto the longer diagonal of the sensor. So adding the black margins feature isn't as useful as it once was. Let's see what happens without those dark borders. There it is, the borders are gone. Now watch that star again. As I rotate, it's going to disappear outside the image. In fact, anything in the upper or lower four-corner regions disappears. But here's the thing. By removing the extra black borders, this image is much smaller, so it's much faster than the previous one. Why? Well, since it doesn't have that black border region, the image is literally half the size in pixels. So RSpec is twice as fast on this image. In fact, RSpec is faster on almost any large image, including those from cooled fits cameras, astronomical video cameras, or DSLRs. So from now on, the default in RSpec is to not add those black borders. How will that affect your use of the program? Well, first of all, because the black borders are gone, you see more of the star image details when you enlarge the image. That can be helpful when positioning the orange capture lines or pointing your telescope or even just focusing. And on modern cameras with large sensors, it's likely that your spectrum only takes up a small amount of the sensor itself. Here, for example, is an image that was captured on a cooled fits camera. It's about 3,200 pixels across. Notice how short the spectra are. So there's seldom a need these days to squeeze your spectra onto a small sensor by deliberately using the longer diagonal. So there's no longer the need for the black borders and rotation. So our suggestion is that you take a few more moments when you're pointing your telescope to be sure that your star and spectra aren't near the edges of the image. That way, if for some reason you need to rotate them, they'll stay in view and won't require that black border to stay visible. However, having said that, if for some reason you need that black border, you can get it back on the Options screen Advanced tab by putting a check mark here. One quick side note here. If you're using a slit spectrometer, you may have accumulated some calibrations of reference lamps that you reuse from time to time. Now that the black border is gone, the width of the image in pixels has changed from what it was in the past. The data has moved horizontally in the image. Your previous calibration was done on a different sized image and won't be correct. You'll need to recreate those calibrations, or you can use the Options screen here to get the black borders back. And here's another short and simple hint. Rotating an image is expensive. Whether you're rotating by just 1 degree or 100 degrees, RSpec has to recalculate each and every pixel using some complicated math. On larger images, this can take a noticeable amount of time. For most of you, especially if you're using static images, it's not a big deal for the software to take a bit more time to refresh the screen. But if you've noticed on larger image, the software gets a little slow, for best results, spend a little extra time up front getting your grating mounted so that you don't need to use rotation. And there's another good reason you may want to avoid rotation. In some circumstances, rotating an image can introduce some artifacts that show up as noise. So for these reasons, we encourage you, leave your rotation at 0 degrees. In fact, in this release, when you rotate out of 0 degrees, the software will blink the rotate button. If this blinking really bugs you, you can turn it off on the options screen.